promised our camera operator that I'd try to stand in a small box, but my Marine Corps history has me moving around a bit. So I apologize if I step out. But thank you very much for the hospitality and inviting us here today to talk about the future of Kansas. For those of you that don't know, my roots to the area go back to my family. I'm number 8 out of 9 kids, and 1 through 7 were born in Kansas City. And so for the rest of my life, I was always coming back to Kansas as that anchor to the family. And after my military service, in 20 years in Arizona, the last 6 with the Commerce Authority there, in a very similar role in economic development, I made a promise to myself I was going to get out of that desert heat and exchange that for Kansas heat. And here it is. So at any rate, a little bit about that conversation, because it was deliberate. I was leaving Kansas, and I was leaving Arizona for Kansas. And I started networking within this community, and I was reaching out to everybody in economic development to learn more about what was going on here. What does Kansas need? And can I help? And so that eventually led to a few conversations with our lieutenant governor, and personality-wise, we just hit it off. We're in different parties, but we can see eye to eye and agree on things and get things done. And when we were talking about what Kansas needs, he asked if I had any questions, and I said, yeah. How many of your college and community college and high school graduates leave Kansas after they graduate? And it stopped him for a second, and he asked, why are you asking that question? And I told him, well, in Arizona, I was the headquarter hunter. I was the guy who went off after some of the larger projects. I just got lucky a couple times, I swear. It took an army to make them happen. But I asked that question because that's the question they were asking us. And what they were doing is they were trying to find communities where that number is big, that they're leaving because they're looking for an opportunity that isn't there, or maybe they didn't know that it was there. And these companies want to come in and kind of intercept that as their workforce. And so as we started taking a look at that, I saw that the state loses about 14,000 students every year after graduation. I'm like, that's bad, but it's good. It can help us on the economic development side from the standpoint of attracting larger projects to Kansas. And that was the beginning of what led to the conversation on Apex. And we'll get into that a little bit later today. But our roadmap for today, we're just going to talk about the momentum that Kansas has. It's an amazing story to tell here. It really is. That a city as a state as established as Kansas is. I mean, to put it in context, Arizona is barely 100 years old. And but in Kansas, we've got this established foothold in the Midwest, and we're able to leverage that into this incredible momentum that we have. And we're seeing more and more deals coming to the state, and you'll see that in our pipeline. I'll break that down here for you in a minute. And there are a lot of companies in the region that want to grow here, which is an awesome sign. They like what they have, they love the Midwestern work ethic, and they want to get more of that and grow in the area. And we've got a plan for how to help foster prosperity in the rural markets as well. And I don't know about Kansas, but in Arizona, they would slay me for saying the word rural. They prefer smaller communities. So you'll hear me use those interchangeably. And then some community-focused resources that I'll touch on, but we have staff in our office that are true subject matter experts that can do those programs much more justice. But for beginners, I just want to start on the momentum story for Kansas. And there's a lot to be said about momentum. There are states in this country that have negative momentum that's very difficult to break. I would put Ohio on that list. But here in the state, over the past 3 years, they were coming out of the Commerce Department being compressed on a budget and being compressed on staffing. And so that was the beginning of rebuilding the organization and being able to effectively recruit companies to the state. And that's one of the things these companies want to see when they're visiting the area is that they will be properly supported when they arrive. And that momentum continued into 2020 with $2.5 billion of investment in the state, which at the time was very near the record for the state of Kansas. And that momentum continued. We had some excellent wins in 2021. And that led to a true state record of $3.5 billion invested in the state, and this is continuing. Again, you'll hear it a little bit when we get into the Apex projects. We're now, as a state, we're now in an entirely new class of competition, and it happens quietly, but I want to call it to your attention that prior to the Apex bill being passed, Kansas had 2 mega projects in its pipeline. And by mega project, I mean there's $1 billion or more in capital expenditure investment associated with that specific project. We had 2, and one of them was on life support. And those projects, if you can begin to accumulate those, you start winning, and success begets success. When their suppliers start to come in, you'll start seeing what we previously thought was a large accomplishment is now just the supplier to something even larger. So there's a threshold we're crossing, and I'll call that out here in a minute. But it's not enough just for us to kind of break our arms, pat ourselves on the back, because that's something else I learned about Kansas. It's an extraordinarily humble population. In the middle of an occupation that requires beating the drum, making noise, and tooting your own horn on occasion. So we turn to the industry, and the industry is looking back at us and saying, Kansas is doing something right. We're doing great on the available sites that are there, the infrastructure is there, the people are there, and the proximity is there. We're literally at the crossroads of America, where you can move goods throughout North America, from Canada to Mexico, from the Carolinas to California. So there's a lot that we have to work with here, and the industry is recognizing it. So a little bit about our pipeline. I was asked today to include a little bit about our framework for growth, and that's kind of how the pipeline for the Commerce Department is broken out. And you'll see that aerospace, which is certainly an anchor for the Wichita market, we're seeing more projects in that space, and we're seeing this convergence. And so when you're looking at this chart here, I see 3 industries merging as it relates to the workforce that they need. And those industries are medical devices, electric vehicles, and the aerospace and defense industry. And those 3, the relation that they have for workforce is they need people that are accustomed to working with very precise parts. And they need people that are accustomed to working in a high reliability mindset. So those 3 industries start to pivot around each other. And from the standpoint of the framework for growth conversation, then, the question is, how do you build a workforce? Do you do it specific? The biotech sector, do you do it specific to space? Do you do it, or do you take a more generic approach, recognizing that all of those industries have something in common when it relates to workforce? And it's an open conversation. We're still visiting how that fits in our framework for growth. But Kansas has always been strong on the food processing space. We see that more and more. And the state was actually critical. It's easy to forget now what the beginning of COVID looked like. And that was the beginning of supply chain strength. It was food supply, it was a number of other areas that Kansas was able to address the calling to be able to fill in where a lot of the gaps were beginning to emerge. And again, on the conversation around the framework for growth is logistics and distribution. Because Kansas, the rail system here is amazing. In Arizona, it's not as robust. And it's kind of wonky from the standpoint that the northern half of the state is serviced by Burlington Northern, the southern half by Union Pacific, and nowhere shall the 2 cross. Here, Kansas has a completely different kind of asset right in their backyard. It's on this logistics space. So I think what you're going to start to see in many of the opportunities that we're working on is, as the economy changes and we become a distribution economy, even the smallest communities are landing some of these Amazon distribution centers and other types of distribution centers. I think you'll start to see heavy distribution become a bigger thing as the electric vehicle industry takes hold. All of the materials that go into the battery, that's the science of the electric vehicle space, is the battery. All those materials are heavy, and you move heavy things by rail. So I think you'll start to see more more of those types of opportunities emerging in the state. And of course, you'll see this huge boost on the advanced manufacturing side. That's a big shift for Kansas, is to see more and more of these advanced manufacturing projects in the state. And of course, a great deal of pride around Project Life, which was recently announced here from Manhattan. So a little bit about by region, what does this look like? Kansas isn't all that different from my former background in Arizona, in that there are parts of the state that feel neglected. And perhaps they are, and we need to fix that, whether that's from a small business standpoint, entrepreneurship efforts, but they want to know how do the projects break out, how do we participate in this? And it's not just a rural aspect either. We're hearing more and more from employers that are evaluating the area. They're putting us to task. Talk to me about diversity in your community. And they want to see the figures that are around that. How are you doing as it relates to including them in the successes that are taking place in the community? So these are our breakouts here, but you'll see that overall there's over $20 billion of potential in our pipeline for the state. And we'll break those out by regions. Some of that is industry specific, especially if it's food production, if it's petroleum, chemical industries. You'll see those in different parts of the state. And so this specializing effort for Wichita around aviation is working for aerospace for them, and I think there's potential in the state of Kansas to break into the semiconductor space, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on that as well. So a little bit how these larger projects can come to the state of Kansas. The Apex bill began with a conversation around Kansas history with large projects, and it really wasn't intentional. We were just trying to call the record to the surface that Kansas was 0-11 on mega projects with $1 billion or more. And we had another opportunity to work one of these in the state of Kansas. It had a very high probability to it, very high viability, but the incentive programs just weren't set up right. And for projects that are that large, they had huge depreciation schedules at the beginning of it because the investment's so large. And so when we offer state incentives in the form of a tax credit that they can't really trade or do anything else with, that credit doesn't really have value to them until 8 or 10 years in the future when all that depreciation is finally cleared their operating losses. So we were told, you guys got to do something different here. Everything else looks great, but the incentives just don't work for our industry. And to the Kansas leadership credit, they listened. And further to their credit, they acted. And we started designing what that might look like, using the existing programs that we have, maybe changing them a bit where they're a little bit more flexible, and to really put Kansas in the fight. Like we want our spot at the table when it comes to these large projects. So the Apex bill, it's an incentive package for companies that are investing at least $1 billion in the state. What's truly innovative and what helped us win some of these awards from the industry recognition, I should say, was that it included suppliers. It was a holistic look at how big these companies are, what's coming here, what wants to come here, and the issues that they run into. And what we find is that on huge companies like that, any sort of vendor change, their key vendors, changing those out is highly problematic for them. In the semiconductor space, you're talking about super pure materials, you're talking about highly specialized activities that qualifying a vendor takes years. And when they need to expand, they need to be able to bring their suppliers with them, and they need the suppliers to be excited about going, because if they choose not to, it really changes the dynamics of that particular company. So in this bill, they included up to 5 suppliers that would also be eligible for the benefits under the program. And again, the purpose of the framework for growth was to provide guidance in these situations. What industries do you want to attract to your state? And that's where we were very specific that we wanted to be advanced manufacturing, aerospace, the food and agricultural business, distribution, and professional and technical services. All of those were described in the framework for growth, but it still leads to questions, right? You try to describe your strategy general enough that it casts a wide net, but not so general that it doesn't have meaning anymore. And so what you notice is missing from here is a specific reference to data centers. And data centers are huge capital investments, but they don't create a lot of jobs. And so I'm sure we're going to run into some questions around whether technical services and data centers are the same thing. But the thing about the Apex bill, it's always in the fine print, of course, is that, and I mean, sorry about the eye chart, but in the fine print is we get to use this bill once a year for the next 2 years. So we get to use it once in 2022, and we get to use it once in 2023, and that's it. Then it sunsets. And so it was an important part of a huge shift in how the state was approaching its business to put those curves in place to make sure the program didn't run away from us. And I think those were sensible curves to put in, because what happened after we announced the Apex bill is those 2 projects that we had swelled to a dozen in 60 days. So the projects were out there, we just weren't at the table. And so this bill helped us get there and surface those. So the key changes, though, you'll see some familiarity here in our HPIP bill, but instead of the 10% tax credit, there's a up to 15%. That's at the Secretary's discretion, and it's reviewed by the state approved by the State Finance Council. So that tax credit for the mega projects, is fully refundable. So you'll know that under the HPIP program, they can trade up to 50% of the credits that they have. And we now have recorded transactions in the state. When they do sell their HPIP credits, they're usually about a 9% discount. But under the mega projects, they will be able to use that capital as a fully refundable tax credit, and that becomes an important part of the capital stack. How are we going to finance a $1 billion project in your community? And making the incentives more usable is an important part of that. There's also a partial payroll rebate. We took out the PEAK program because it was tied to we'll be using the credits that they would have been getting under the PEAK program and putting those dollars and setting them aside for a training program for them. But the 10%, up to 10% of the partial payroll rebate for the companies. And then we set aside a specialized training program for them. And again, part of the discussion was when these companies are huge, these are huge companies, and they are genuinely transformative in nature. They are shifting your economy almost overnight. In the time it takes them to build their facility, they need ready workforce. And in many industries, like there's automotive in the region, but the electric vehicle space is very, very different. They hire more cyber people, more coders, and more electrical engineers than they do any other sort of practice within their companies. And so I'm excited to see these sort of things happening, because I keep in my head every night I go back to that 14,000 number. I have major employers telling me that they can't find what they're looking for, and yet we're losing 14,000 people every year. And so that leads to some more activity I'll talk about in a minute on how the governor and lieutenant governor are working together for kind of a welcome back campaign to recruit people back to the state of Kansas. And that includes this next portion, which is a relocation allowance, which we've never had in the state before associated with any of our programs. And the goal here, and this was I think wisely at the insistence of our legislators, that we include in this, if you're hiring thousands of people, you should be helping us recruit people who left Kansas to come back to Kansas. And so there's a relocation component to this bill as well. And that's the whole goal there is with these new industries coming into the state to be able to attract people who may have left the state for those same types of jobs. So again, we include the suppliers on here. That's everything listed on the right. they're modified a bit because the supplier's coming, because there was a discussion, does the supplier have to come here? If they have to come, why are we putting incentives behind it? If they don't have to come, then we need to compete for those. And I think that these benefits mark that middle ground of showing that we still want to be able to attract those types of companies to the state and make sure that they're helping and contributing to the strength of our communities. So a little bit about the kinds of programs, the mega projects that are coming. I'm not the person who named these, so I can't explain why Your Eyes Only is a consumer goods company. I have no idea what it is. But this is a sample of at least 10 of the projects that we have. I think we're up to 12 now. And I'm really pleased that we're seeing more and more of these mega projects on almost a weekly basis. And so these are the kinds of investments that these companies are looking, at least considering, making in Kansas. And there's an important dialogue that has to take place when we shop these deals across the state of Kansas. Do you want this in your community? It's a really important question to ask because these large projects have a great deal of potential of changing your community. And that could be for the better, or if the view of your community isn't compatible with some of these companies, that might not be such a great thing. But these are huge companies. Many of these are $4 billion investments or more. These are significant investments. And just remember that behind every one of these is up to 5 more suppliers that will be coming with them. So we're seeing a lot of activity in the electric vehicle space. And some of these are the vehicle assemblers, some of them are in the battery space. A remark that was made, and I believe, is that the battery space is the new oil. That's where it's at for the electric vehicle space. And so we have a great deal of interest in companies that are in that space. And not all of the projects that are in our pipeline would qualify for the APEX program. An example, you'll see that Project Zanzibar is a data center. It's unlikely that a data center would be where we placed our chips for 2023 if it's a huge investment, but there aren't a lot of jobs behind it. So that doesn't mean they're out, but I'm also pleased to see in the semiconductor space, we have 2 there that are looking, and again, these are entirely new jobs for the state, new industries for the state of Kansas. It's something to be excited about. This doesn't happen often. And in the semiconductor space, there's a great deal of investment, not only by the companies, but by the federal government to reshore this industry for DoD purposes and for other security-related matters. So you've already got a DoD facility, a Homeland Security facility here in the area. And what I'm saying here is there's potential to bring in an industry that has DoD funding behind it as well. So it's a really exciting piece. One of those is actually a company that's already here in Kansas, but has very, very aggressive growth plans. So a little bit about, what are we selling when we're talking about Kansas and we're talking to these companies, the site selectors, the projects that are coming to town. They like the fabric of Kansas. And on some of the biggest projects we've ever worked on, that was the feedback that we got, that they liked Kansas. They liked what it was, they liked the people here. And we also have demonstrated time and again how all of the different stakeholders can work together. It's not always that way. You can find markets where there's just this continuous competition between us versus them, Phoenix versus Tucson, and you'll see it across the country. That matters to them because when something gets stuck on a big project, you need everybody working together, not quarreling over who's in charge or who owns this or who's going to pay for it. And we have that world-class talent. Not all of it is staying here, and that's something I really want to work on, is helping those 14,000 students that are graduating find their place here in Kansas and staying here. And we have the other economic assets here. Not everybody has oil and gas in their state. Not everybody has a massive rail system. So there are a lot of unique assets here in the state of Kansas. And just a general approach to business here, how you get things done. Yes, there are still handshake deals that happen here. And so when we're speaking with these communities, that's what they're talking about. When they talk about difficulty in hiring, we ask them tough questions. Tell us about your high school recruitment strategy. Tell us about your university recruitment strategy. Oh, it's working great, it's working great, okay. And we dig into it and you find that they're not using the tools that your target audience is using. They're not using handshake. They're not using a lot of these different sort of elements that would help them connect with those communities. So if you hear that about we can't hire and we can't this or we can't that, it's here. I guarantee you it's here. And there's so much of it here it's leaving. And I call that surplus labor. And that's how you turn the conversation when you're talking to a lot of these companies is, tell me about hiring in Kansas. I'll tell you straight out of the gate, we have surplus labor. It's looking for work. It's not finding it, so it leaves. And that's a completely different conversation than in some of these markets where there are no people, and there's just not enough people in those markets. It's a very different kind of issue that we're trying to solve there. So, out of fear for going on for too long, I would like to open this up, an opportunity to answer any questions you may have, any critiques you want to offer, and I mean that sincerely. If you want to see something done better, say so, because we listen. So, Jason, is there?
I think we have mics. Okay. So, Paul, I have a question first. First of all, I do want to make this comment. So this is my third year at our leaders retreat, and you are our third deputy secretary. So I am hopeful that you'll be with us at the next retreat. We're not bad luck. I was starting to get nervous about it. Talk a little bit. So we've struggled regionally, actually, on sort of developing a strategy around sites and buildings. So as you talk about particularly the Apex, but then just in general, what sort of projects site-wise how big a site is typically something that you would recommend a community if they're interested in competing for these kind of projects?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. It allows me to kind of poke at two different areas. One is on the mega project side, a little bit about what they're looking for. They're looking for sites that are actually between two populations. They don't want to rely on just one. That feeds into transportation planning, it feeds into a lot of things. So they're looking for sites that are between two populations that can serve their location. Physically, they're looking for something that's at least 500 acres, but maybe 1,000. And that there's potential for more than one freeway or a highway exit to the site. One of the projects we're working on, they explained it this way. Imagine a minor league baseball game being let out every 8 hours. That's what it's like going in and out of this facility. And so surface transportation, surface infrastructure is important to them. But so is the access to a reasonable distance. It doesn't have to be on site, but electrical power and sufficient availability should be near the site. Water is something that's becoming more and more important as Western companies are leaving the Colorado Basin for other parts of the U.S. So having a good dialogue around the water conversation, and then having a realistic conversation with the landowners. In some instances, when you say that you've got a company coming in and they want 1,000 acres, for some landowners, that's a lottery ticket. That's life-changing wealth. But they don't have a realistic understanding of what the value of the land is if it's missing all these key pieces of infrastructure. So I would encourage sites that are interested in participating in our mega projects to go through the Certified Sites program that we manage, just to help answer all of those questions. So when they come into town, it's what I call forming an early bias, where when they come here, like, wow, these guys check this box, that box, and the other box, and right there, half the field is gone. And so now it's just down to us and 4 or 5 others, and I hate losing, so we'll win every one of those.
My question is, if it's not a mega project and those are so limited a year, what about an average site for an average company looking for a location? We'd be probably more in that zone.
Right. So I think that's what we can do, what we probably should do. That's a great question, is build around that using the framework for growth in the industries that are in each of those. What kind of sites are they looking for? Are they looking for office space? Are they looking for 50 acres? Are they looking for 100 acres? If it's advanced manufacturing, it's going to be in that space. There's a big trend now, and when manufacturers move, they want to bring their suppliers with them. If they don't bring the suppliers with them, they want room for the suppliers to eventually come. And so a lot of the sites will need to be kind of oversized, if you will, for what that client is asking for. And if you offer it up, do you need space for your suppliers? And do you need, the state has a data set of all of the women and minority-owned companies that have gone through the certification process. If you raise this, I promise you will get their attention. If you offer to them, do you have any sort of DEI objectives where we're trying to hit on diversity, equity, and inclusion? If we have a data set of 500 companies here in the state of Kansas that can help you fulfill that interest, would that be of interest that it's free? And you'll get them thinking in a different way, that they'll see that you're past the basics at that point. We're not just talking about 4 corners of a piece of property. I'm talking about how you contribute to my community. And we hear it from projects. These aren't my sayings, it's theirs. They're saying you can judge a lot about a company by the way they spend their money. And I agree. So when it comes to the supplier base, be thoughtful when you're going in there. It's not about the project. Talk about their suppliers too. Don't just be happy with just that one project. Dig into the suppliers. Any other questions? I'm staring right into the light. Sorry, Lindsay.
Sure.
Perfect.
Thank you very much for being here. So when you were looking or showing about the electric vehicle projects, the batteries, I am going to assume that the charging stations will be coming in with the batteries, correct? Or not? Because you can have, and we can make electric batteries all day long, and I know down the road we're going to have electric cars in the next couple of years. Kids are going to be driving electric cars. There's a parking issue, and then there's the charging issue. How big are those, and where do they fit in on any projects?
I'm going to take those in reverse order. So a little bit about like the parking, just kind of like how does the electric vehicle infrastructure, how does that industry work, right? Because you don't have charging stations everywhere. There's an interest in those vehicles. They're growing faster than ever. And I think what was missing previously, where a lot of communities weren't willing to make the investment, was this ambiguity around what's going to happen in electric vehicles. When you have General Motors saying 100% of their product line is going to be electric vehicles by 2035, I suggest we get ready. If GM is doing that, the others will follow. And Ford's already doing it. Volvo, BMW have all made similar commitments to have 100% electric vehicle product lines by 2035. And that's part of our federal objective they're trying to hit. California's driving some of that. But there are dollars that are going into establishing electric vehicle stations in the state. It's nowhere near what you would need for if everybody were driving an electric vehicle. On the parking issue, though, it's interesting that you raise that, because what I think is going to happen on the electric vehicle space, Volvo was already talking about you can't buy the car. And so you would be like it's almost like a timeshare. You're a partial owner of the vehicle. And the electric vehicle, in combination with autonomous technology, when you're done using it, it's going to go to one of the other owners and take them wherever they need to go. And so you'll actually need fewer parking spaces because there will be fewer cars on the road. So it's an interesting evolution of what's taking place there and how all of that changes. It's next level stuff, and it's a part of what keeps you up at night, and it's a part of what gets your head off the pillow in the morning too. So But from the standpoint of more infrastructure, Department of Energy is on top of that one, and they're looking at alternate sources too. There's discussion around hydrogen as another source for fuel, and being able to do that in some of the more remote locations where it's solar and groundwater, and you're splitting water and creating hydrogen in some of the most remote locations in the country. So I don't think it'll be exclusively electric vehicles, unless they're using hydrogen to generate electricity on board, which is how Nikola Motor, the semi-truck company, is doing it. So it's kind of a blend of those. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Okay.
One more.
Over here. Thank you for being here and great information in your presentation. Can you talk a little bit more about the biodefense and agriculture sectors, which are sectors where we have a lot of expertise and where we're focusing a lot of energy? So to help this particular region, what are some of the things at the Department of Commerce that can help in those particular sectors?
Great question, because when you're looking at that category, it's fairly broad, right? So when you're recruiting within that space, there's really two questions you're going to get right out of the gate. Are you talking about human biotech, or are you talking about animal biotech? And I think wisely we're saying all of it. We're talking about all of it. And it's big, bold ideas like that catch people's attention out there. It's how you get things like Research Triangle in the Carolinas and whatnot. So we're doing more activity there, not only just through our university system and our university partners in building that kind of competency here. There's a great deal of it. And you take a look at how other industries can help feed into that. I would not have naturally thought of a company like Hughes, which has tons of veterinarians on staff, contributing to that, their research and defense, R&D facility, contributing to that sort of biotech space, but it does in a really powerful way. So it's recruiting companies that aren't just landing on the X. This is definitely a biotech company, but it's also all the other companies that help make that ecosystem work. And arranging it in a way that, again, they're able to pull from more than one market to get the workforce that they're looking for. And so for those reasons, I don't think it's an accident that Manhattan and Kansas City is that corridor, because along the way you have more than one city. Excuse me. You have more than one city that you can pull from if you locate between them. So a lot of it is just teaching them how to find a location in the state. So we're checking all the boxes of what they're looking for. Financial incentives are important. I'm here to tell you, it's like fourth on the list. They want to know about people. Your people, their people, is everybody that should be at the table, and I'm here to stress that diversity, equity, and inclusion will come up in virtually every conversation we're in. So the communities need to be ready to speak to that. Does that help? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? I'm going to keep going until you guys give me the...
You've got 15 good minutes left.
The announcement of Scorpion just a week ago is a big win, not just for our region, but also for the state of Kansas. And I'm excited that it's coming. I'm hopeful that it's going to be a catalyst for some other growth here in our region. I also think we're going to be experiencing some growing pains, because with that big announcement, we are going to have to deal with issues like there's not enough room in the schools, housing, how's that going to affect transportation on the Highway 24 corridor? And to address each of those issues, it's a lot of planning, and there's long lead times. And we obviously know that our lead time is pretty limited, knowing when Scorpion wants to open and be online. So can you maybe help us understand how to address those issues as we plan for that growth?
Yes, I wish I had brought Tricia with me, Tricia Purdon, who is on top of a lot of the housing initiatives for the state. But this is an issue that exists everywhere in the country, and we've never seen this happen before. And you go to any market, you can go to Boise, Idaho, you can go to anywhere, and they're going to tell you how difficult housing is, and right next to that, how challenging childcare is, right? You're hearing that everywhere. Those issues are hand in glove. And we're seeing that everywhere. And a big part of that is there's been a change. A lot of homes that were previously on the market for sale are now getting bought by investors and turned into vacation rental by owners sitting empty half the year. So there's been a profound shift in housing. And it's not that the communities were caught sleeping or anything like that. The industry just changed. And so the response then is we need more housing being built. And then the next question is, what kind of housing? Because in some of the communities, surprisingly, it's not the more affordable housing that's needed. You can't get executives to come to your community if they can't find a house that their spouse is interested in. And so it starts opening up quickly. It's about the character of the community. So it's about making the most out of the programs that the state has. We have been putting the governor, I believe in her bill, has $140 million, I believe, that she put into the bill, in the budget this year, specifically for housing. Housing and childcare, those are very close to her. It's easy to read on anybody. You can tell when they're passionate about something you can tell a lot about somebody by how they spend their money. And so you'll see these programs where they're putting dollars out there to help with this, to relieve the strain, but the communities need to know what kind of housing they need. And it could be multifamily housing, it could be mid-tier, and it may be low-income housing. There's no shame in any of it. It's just what do you need, but know what you need when you're asking for housing support, because when you get it, you're going to be expected to move very quickly on it. The expectations from us is from the companies that are building in your community. Does that help? Okay, good. Yeah.
You had said tax incentives are generally number 4 on that list. So, and you made it on the housing. What are the top 3?
I didn't catch the whole question.
You said when these companies are coming in, tax incentives are about their 4th priority, maybe about the 4th priority down the list. What are the top 3?
So top 3. So sorry, I apologize, I missed the question. So out of the top 4, I would put incentives 4 almost every time. And if incentives are like number 1, they're probably not going to fit in Kansas. Because they're not going to give back to the community, they're less likely to give back to the community. They would be this square peg in a round hole. But the bigger issues are around, it's going to be the availability of workforce, how is the community working together, the university systems, all of that to help build these. Does the location fit the business case? If I'm a transportation company or a distribution center and there's no heavy roadways around, then it's going to be problematic. So it's going to be the sites and the business case that are kind of combined there in 2 and 3 to see how this really fits. I can't sell a company on a community that's a poor fit and doesn't have workforce. It doesn't matter how many incentives you put towards it. The companies know it just won't work in those kind of locations. So it's just about the business case, the site itself, and the available workforce that are really going to be the drivers there. You're welcome.
Yes. Good afternoon, and thank you for the information this afternoon. My name is Sheila Ellis-Glasper. I'm president of Black Entrepreneurs of the Flint Hills, as well as a minority certified company through the state of Kansas. And I noticed you mentioned diverse suppliers several times. And for us here in our region, I think with some of the big companies that are coming, that has been one of my questions is what does that look like, the intentionality of diverse supplier programming, and what would you kind of suggest for a community like us that does have certified minority-owned businesses, and what does that look like for our community to really become a champion of diverse supplier programming with some of the large companies that are coming to our area, the ones that are currently here?
So there's 2 courses of action that I would recommend. Because when a company comes, when their suppliers come and they're looking for help and they're being thoughtful on how they're hiring and where they spend their money, we're directing them to 2 locations, to 2 data sets to find what they're looking for. One of them is the certified women and minority own business program. It sounds like you're already familiar with that. But I encourage you to keep that information up to date. So if it's been a couple of years since you've last updated, I would encourage you to keep that fresh. Because when they ask us for that help, we provide them that directory, all of it. So if they're looking for lawyers, they're looking for landscapers, it doesn't matter. We're giving them the entire directory to be able to connect with the community. The other is, and this is more so around the manufacturing base, if you're interested in serving manufacturers in the state. Under the Kansas Manufacturing Solutions, or KMS, Tiffany Stillwell's group is running a really strong program called Connex, Konnex. And under that program, they're helping manufacturers that are already here connect with suppliers that are in the area. And again, between what she's working on, we work very closely together, and in fact I have a meeting with her tomorrow to discuss this further, on how that KMS, that Connex program, and the certified program can come together to help employers that are coming to the state find local support. Because a lot of times what will happen, the engineering team, like if it's a company coming here from Los Angeles, you can bet that the engineering team is in Los Angeles. And everybody else that they were talking to is from Los Angeles because it was easier. But if you can make that transition to them coming into the community super easy, they'll make the change because they're going to get tired of paying Los Angeles rates and all that stuff, the time zone differences, all of it. So thank you for that question, because those are two specific areas. You can act on those today, and I encourage you to do that.
So I'm Nate Butler from Junction City, Kansas. You know, within our region, we have a very large military installation, but yet we lack DoD industry in our regional area. So what can we do in your mind, or what is your thoughts on how do we create or attract more interest in bringing DoD industry to our community?
That is a fantastic question. I'm 54 years old, and to this day, the hardest transition I ever made was from active duty to civilian life. It took well over a year to make that happen. It was painful. But a big part of that is I encourage the communities, if you're not already, to get engaged in SkillBridge. If you're not familiar with it, the SkillBridge program was designed by Congress to help military service members transition to civilian life. And what they understood was that if you don't have, if you're military, to me that was my first real job, right? And so if you don't have civilian experience, it's going to be very bumpy to transition into a civilian job. And so what they did under the SkillBridge program is for companies that have defined training programs to bring somebody into a job, is you can tap into military service personnel who are leaving military service but are still in active duty in their last 180 days of service. And because they're active duty military personnel, they're still being paid by DoD. You're actually prohibited from paying them, bonusing them, any of that. And so these companies can then tap into military service personnel, test them for cultural fit, test them for competency, and test them for leadership, because oftentimes when they go to the military community, they're looking for leaders, and they'll find them. And so a lot of the companies that are looking to tap into the community workforce, I'm very deliberate about raising the SkillBridge program, because for many of the military service personnel that are looking for that kind of opportunity, the roadblock, if you will, are having enough employers that know about the program, that are creating an opportunity they can move into. It's really not all that different from our college students that leave the state because they didn't find an opportunity here. The same is happening in the military. And for me personally, I fell in love with Arizona by my military service in Yuma, which is right on the Mexican border. And that happens in Kansas, I guarantee you it's happening here. They want to stay. And they're looking for those opportunities, but we've got to connect them. We've got to be deliberate about connecting them in the communities, because they have a skill set, and they have a really hard time articulating it because they don't have business context. So when I'm a military service person, leaving service after my service was 6 years, some go 10, 12, 18, it's really hard to put a fine point on the value of leadership. and the ability to maintain multiple priorities without losing focus. How do you market yourself as a military person when you were a parajumper or a tank operator? There's no civilian tank job, and that's how they see it, right? But when you take a look at how they can lead a crew under extremely tense circumstances, and they have a safety mindset, and they have a strategy mindset, and that strategy mindset served me more than once. Particularly in this competition, not to get too bloody of a point on it, but when we're talking about these big deals, my team will hear me reference, how do we get this project into our kill zone? We're going to win this. We are in control of this situation. How do we make sure that we're the ones that win and none of the other competitors can get in there? And that's the way they're wired. They've been taught that the entire time that they've been in military service. So thank you for that question, because it's the biggest gap to cover still in Kansas, is raising awareness of the military talents that we have here, and the ones that have went on to elsewhere. There could be in Germany, Japan, anywhere, where they want to come back to Kansas. They love it here, and they're about to separate from military service. And if they have a supportive commander, they'll move them here so they can participate in the program. So there are ways of getting them more involved. It's focusing on the skills, not the occupation. And taking a look at what that means, and then for the employers in their HR departments, it's really important that they have a military service person or somebody with military service on their HR team to help with that adjustment when they're coming back in. Because you can't bark orders in a civilian kind of job that you might have done when you're in military service. And there's an adjustment there. You'll miss the camaraderie. And all of that will come into play. So there's an adjustment that comes with that, but it's worth every penny and every minute of time that you spend on it. Any other questions?
Thank you for being here. You provided a wealth of information. You talked a lot about sites and different sizes of sites and locations relative to sites. What about shovel-ready sites?
So shovel-ready, and that's what I would put under our certified sites program, where by shovel-ready, what we're communicating when we say that to the site selectors is that everything is to the, when we say shovel-ready, their expectation is that everything is at the property line. Everything. The roads are there, the power is there, the water's there, wastewater's there, everything's at the property line. If you have one of those, you are sitting on gold. And the important component there then is working closely with the community economic developers that can raise that project to where we can see it and include it in the responses that we provide to the site selectors. More and more, we're getting the ask. Please only submit 3 for the entire state. 3 sites for the whole state. So those shovel-ready sites are likely to make the top of the list if they're the right size and the right location. There just aren't enough of them. There never are. And it contributes to something else I haven't mentioned yet but should have: speed. If you want to outcompete any other state or any other market, move swiftly. And if you have a shovel-ready site, that allows you to move swiftly. If you can carve months off of their development calendar, their build calendar for a facility, you're going to rise to the top of their list very, very quickly.
Okay, we have time for 2 more. I'm going to start with...
Just really quick, I wanted to circle back to what you said about the Career Skills Program and Skills Bridge. I'm the military liaison from Manhattan, Janet, and this is my counterpart, Craig Bender from Junction City. If you're interested in those programs and connecting with Fort Riley Transition Assistance, we are the people to get in touch with for the area, and I'll hand it off to Keith.
2 more questions. Keith, you're first.
I did not plan that, but I'm very grateful that she's here.
Yeah, and then we have, Karen has one in the back, and then we'll have to end.
Okay, I'm Keith Westbrook from Blueville. The monster in the room here in this workforce is migrant workers. And I can tell you, Blueville, we're about 30 people short. We've had to turn down work in this room to people that want us to work for them. How can we get some of these migrant workers into the workforce? And we've tried, but the rules are terrible nationwide. But I think we gotta solve the workforce problem with migrant workers.
So I just want to make sure I understand the question. How do we get them more involved?
How do we get them employed? How do we get them here to help us out?
That's a great question. So, so on that, before he passed, I had a really interesting conversation with Senator McCain. And he was talking about what's driving that. What drives them to come here? Is it the American dream? What is it? And it's the economy it's a magnet, is the term he used. If you want to increase the number of people that are coming to your community from across our borders, it's that magnet that does it. So can they prosper here? And so it's more than just the job opportunity, which is important. Can they buy a home? Can they drive a car? Can they do the things that they do? The biggest project we're working on right now is asking us about ethnic grocery stores. Does the community reflect what they would find attractive? And so it's a whole equation on addressing attractiveness. What do you want the community to become? Are the basic ingredients there? If you were moving to that community, would it have everything that you and your spouse wanted? Are all of those elements there? So the key part of it is about a holistic look at involvement in the workforce and being deliberate about approaching those communities. If you're interested in tapping into folks coming from south of the border, are the applications in Spanish? Are there any sort of YouTube videos about your company that speak in their language to where they're like, okay, I'm welcome there? And that's a big part of it, I'm welcome there. And that doesn't exist everywhere, unfortunately. And if you put it out there that you're interested in working with that community, you communicate in their language, you eat their food, and you welcome their families, they will find you. Any other questions?
I'm sure you haven't been asked lately. On your list, you have lots of EV projects. So tell us what's going on with the big project that's being considered now. What happens to that list if Kansas gets that project, and what happens to that list if we don't get that project?
Good questions. When we first got the Apex bill passed, that was a part of the dialogue. What happens if this doesn't work? If they don't choose here? There was some faith in building that, and that was, if we build this program, we were going to be at the table for more than just one deal. That was kind of the point of the whole thing, was that this wasn't just for one company. This was to make Kansas competitive in a repetitive fashion. And that was the key thing. This had to be a repeatable process. That can't be just a one-off and we can't do it again for some reason. So we have that pipeline there, and for better or for worse, all the commotion around getting that bill passed into law garnered industry attention. And so we see a lot of them that are looking at the location, and they're different. They all have different kind of customer pressures. And so who are they trying to serve? Are you trying to serve Tesla? Are you trying to serve GM? Are you trying to serve Volvo or BMW? And that will shift, where they locate. Does it fit the business case for them? Are they close to their customer? So we have a number of projects that, if it's not that the company that we originated the bill for, we have others in the pipeline that we can work with. I think that what will be interesting, especially for 2023, is how do we select the next company that participates in the bill in 2023. What I mean by that is, what industry? Do we want another industry here? This will be, if we can attract the electric vehicle battery spacer, it will transform for the better. It will transform the Kansas economy. Do we want to do it again in semiconductors, or do we want another electric vehicle company and to build an industry cluster here where they're all here? And those are important considerations that we need to make. We need to go back to our framework for growth and see what are the other priorities and are they making those kind of investments. And so we don't have any announcements yet on the project that we built this for, They're very close to running into their own deadlines to get started, so we expect something soon. But we're not single-threaded. All of those projects we were just looking at there, all of those are viable projects, and it wasn't always that way. We've covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time, and I think I'm getting the hook.
Never. But let's all give Paul.